Well, turning the other cheek has never been a popular thing to do, even among Christians, has it? And it is often labelled as weak or foolish. Yet there is no denying these words that Jesus said. Love your enemies, turn your other cheek, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who abuse you, and so on. Now, I'm sure you would all agree with me that none of this comes easily or naturally. Response to a hurt is usually quick and instinctive. We strike back. Sometimes physically, sometimes verbally, and almost always mentally in the build-up of resentment and anger. Human evolution has conditioned us to believe that there are only two responses to danger, threat, or evil: fight or flight. But the fate of those who violently opposed the Romans was well known to Jesus' listeners. They ended up crucified along the roadsides or sold into slavery. So was Jesus really suggesting that the only option for them was passive submission? Well, the answer to that is no. Jesus is saying that there is, in fact, a third way. Jesus was no less committed to opposing evil than any of the anti-Roman resistance fighters like Barabbas. Walter Wink, the American minister and theologian, in his book The Powers That Be, writes, Jesus never told his oppressed hearers not to resist evil. His entire ministry is at odds with such a preposterous idea. He is instead warning against responding to evil in kind. So perhaps a good summary of Jesus' teaching here would be, do not resist violence with violence. There is another way, the way of non-violent resistance. And he gives his listeners some ideas on what he means. Now, to properly understand these examples he gives, we have to take into account the society and the rules that they lived under at the time. So take, for example, this one. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other also. In the Gospel of Matthew, we're actually told that it is the right cheek that had been struck. And that is important. Why? Well, keep listening. Firstly, we need to understand that in Jesus' time and place, the left hand was only used for unclean tasks and couldn't be used in any other way. Even to gesture with the left hand was an offence. That means it would have been the right hand that was used to strike the other in the scenario that Jesus is presenting. Now, normally, one did not strike a peer. And if they did, the fine was exorbitant. It was a certain amount for a blow with the fist, and even more for backhanding someone, unless, and it's a big unless, that person happened to be an underling, in which case there was no fine at all. So all this suggests that this was a situation Jesus was talking about. For instance, masters backhanded their slaves, husbands their wives, parents their children, men the women, and Romans the Jews. And for these so-called inferior people, retaliating would have been suicidal. The only normal response they thought they could make would be cowering submission. So why then does Jesus counsel these already humiliated people to turn the other cheek? Well, because this action robs the oppressor of the power to humiliate them. You see, such a response would create enormous difficulties for the striker. And to show you that, I've got a volunteer. So, if I have struck Margaret, and I promise you I won't do that, on the cheek, if she turns the right cheek, I've done that, right? And Jesus is now saying, turn the other cheek. Now I have two options. I can do that. Only one option. I really can only do that, because if I try to do that, that's very awkward. You can't slap somebody that way easily. But if I do that, I am treating her as a peer. Okay? So this is what, by turning the other cheek, they were forcing the other person to do, to treat them as an equal. Thank you. So the person who is turning the other cheek is saying, in effect, try again. Your first blow failed to achieve its intended effect. I deny you that power to humiliate me. I am a human being just like you. Your status, your gender, your race, your age, your wealth, whatever, does not alter that. You cannot demean me. Take another example. From him who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Wink suggests that this person was probably being sued for his outer garment. How would that come about? Well, only the poorest of the poor would have nothing but an outer garment to give as collateral for a loan. So in this case, this poor debtor has probably sunk ever deeper into poverty. The debt cannot be repaid, and his creditor has hauled him into court to wring out a repayment. And this would have been quite a familiar situation to those listening to Jesus. So why does Jesus counsel them in that situation to hand over their inner garment as well? Well, because that would mean stripping off all their clothing, because that's all he would have had, and marching out of court stark naked. Nakedness was taboo in Judaism. And interestingly, the shame fell not on the naked party, but on the person viewing or causing one's nakedness. So there stands the creditor, beat red with embarrassment, the outer garment in one hand, the undergarment in the other. The tables have been turned. Jesus is saying very clearly to his listeners, in these cases, in these situations, it's not just a case of retaliate or submit. There are other options open to you. John Powell, an American Jesuit, tells of a man who bought his newspaper each day from a bad-tempered salesman. In spite of daily provocation, he always behaved courteously, no matter how rude the other man was. "Why?" asked a friend. "Why do you stay so pleasant and cool?" The answer came, "Why should I allow his bad temper to pull me down? Why should his rudeness set the lines for my behaviour?" So you see, turning the other cheek is not simply a question of forgiveness or non-violence, the usual interpretations. It's also a question of determining how far I will allow someone else to control my personality and behaviour. If I respond unpleasantly to an unpleasant person, then I am allowing that person to rule my life. I am reacting to his or her anger and allowing myself to be pulled down to that level. If I take hold of myself and say, "No, I'm not going to react like that," then I stay a little bit more in control of events. and I am that little bit more mature as a person than I was before. Just imagine if we could all develop this new way of thinking and acting and not just blindly follow the usual way of the world. We need to respond to the other in a way that shows who we really are and not just react to the way that they are. As Martin Luther King attested, non-violent action gives the oppressed new self-respect and calls on strength and courage they did not know they had. To those with power, Jesus' advice to the powerless may seem paltry, but to those who have had to cringe, bow and scrape before their masters, to those who have internalized their role as inferiors, this small step is momentous. And I want to finish with some quotes from Nelson Mandela that sums up, I think, the gospel this morning beautifully. He was someone who really discovered and followed this other way that Jesus showed. As Desmond Tutu once said, before Nelson Mandela was arrested in 1962, he was an angry, relatively young man. He founded the ANC's military wing. When he was released, he surprised everyone because he was talking about reconciliation and forgiveness and not about revenge. So here are just 3 of his quotes. So speaking on resentment, Mandela said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." On forgiveness, as he left prison, he said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead me to freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." And finally, you will achieve more in this world through acts of mercy than you ever will through acts of retribution. So God of compassion, keep before us the love you have revealed in your Son, who prayed even for his enemies. In our words and deeds, help us to be like him. Amen.